Welcome to the Police and Crime Committee meeting. This morning the committee will be holding a question and answer session with the Mayor's Office for Policing and Crime and the Metropolitan Police Service. Please make sure that your electronic devices are switched to silent mode to avoid any interruptions. Can I now ask our clerk, Lauren, if any apologies have been received?
No apologies have been received today, Chairman.
Thank you, Lauren. Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare?
Noted.
Thank you. Can I ask the committee to confirm the minutes of the meeting held on the 13th of December 2022 to be signed by me as a correct record?
Agreed.
Thank you. Can we note the completed ongoing and closed actions arising from previous meetings?
Confirmed.
Thank you. Can we note the recent action taken by me under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree the letter to the Mayor on the Mayor's Office of Policing and Crime 10 years on?
Noted.
Thank you. Can we note the response from the IOPC to the committee report?
Noted.
Thank you. So we now move on to our main item of business, and I would like to welcome our guests, Sir Mark Rowley, QPM, Commissioner of Police of the Metropolis, Diana Lutchford, Chief Executive of MOPAC, and Kenny Bowie, Director of Strategy and MPS Oversight at MOPAC. And later in the meeting, we will be joined by Liv Peck, who's the Director of the Violence Reduction Units. So, good morning, all. Now, before we start the meeting, Sir Mark would like to just say some words to us. Sir Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Chair. I wanted to say a few words given the news over the last week of the appalling criminality of PC David Carrick, sort of a ghastly case from the Met's history. And I want to talk about that briefly and what we're doing to fix the issues that it highlights. Obviously, you're all aware that from sort of day one, high standards has been top of my agenda for my commissionership. I've been very honest about the fact that I'm sort of pleased to have tens of thousands of great men and women, and I'm always mindful that they listen to my words, as do the people of London who we serve. And we're all equally horrified that we have hundreds in policing who shouldn't be here. And David Carrick is an example of an awful example of that. I must sort of reiterate here my sincere apologies to his victims for our failings. He should not have been a police officer. That's very obvious. A range of poor policy and poor decision making. He shouldn't have been a police officer, and we failed. And we haven't applied the same sense of ruthlessness to guarding our own integrity that we routinely apply to confronting criminals, and I'm deeply sorry for that. I think we failed as investigators, where we should have been more intrusive and joined the dots over his repeated misogyny over decades. And as leaders, our mindset should have been more determined to spot and root out such a misogynist. So as I say, I apologise to his victims, and I want to say sorry to all the women across London who feel let down by this and whose trust in policing is shaken by this. I want to talk about three things that we're doing. I want to talk about action, about review, and about acceleration. So about action, I promised action from day one. 4 months ago, I set out to be ruthless at rooting out those who corrupt our integrity. We've increased the resources in our Department of Professional Standards significantly. We've established an anti-corruption and abuse command, and we've launched the first ever public appeal line through Crime Stoppers, the Crime Stoppers Police Integrity Hotline. And we're getting sort of tens of calls a week to that are leading us to look at new cases. Some of those turn out to be malicious, but some of them turn out to be substantive, and those are generating new caseload. And I think in some ways, the sort of tragedy of the situation we find ourselves in, we are leading the way. It's interesting that even though this is a Met appeal, 1 in 3 of the calls coming through roughly are for other forces that we're passing information on as well. So I think we're sort of, through our challenges, we're helping the rest of the policing confront some issues as well. That's some of the action we're taking so far. I want to talk about review and redress. Clearly, in terms of this particular case, the Home Secretary, I think, has rightly suggested that Lady Eilish Angelini widens the scope of her review to include this case, and we'll support that fully. In terms of things that we're doing, I want to talk about Operation Onyx and about use of data to review the vetting of all officers and staff. So in terms of Operation Onyx, or Project Onyx, what is very clear, isn't it, is that if we haven't been tough enough in our decision making previously, you have to look back at previous cases and say, are there other cases that we got wrong, where we decided somebody was going to stay in the organisation, and in hindsight that's wrong. So we've cast the net very wide. If you look at, so we've looked at last decade officers and staff who have had an allegation which has any hint of sexual misconduct or domestic abuse. So these range from sort of less serious allegations that are sort of largely sort of verbal, for example, all the way through to serious sexual assault allegations. Every one of them has been previously investigated and dealt with as either criminality or misconduct, and come to a position where those people remain in the organisation. What we have to work out is, did we get those decisions right? Some of the reporting in the papers is this is 1,000 new cases, not 1,000 new cases. It's reviewing old cases. And given what we have found so far with the cases that have come to light, like Carrick, we have to assume that whilst I'd be confident that many of the cases we got right, we have to accept that we'll probably find many cases we got wrong, and there'll be people there that we need to have a fresh look at. That might be about their vetting, that might be about reopening investigations. There's all sorts of actions we might take, but the first thing is to systematically review that, and that's a massive piece of work to do that thoroughly. The second piece of review and redress work that we're doing is around a refreshed look at vetting. So members might sort of remember from different conversations you've had, but whilst the Police National Computer has criminal records, criminal convictions on it, and we're confident we know all the officers who have criminal convictions, and people shouldn't be too troubled necessarily about that in itself, because if someone's got a caution as a 13-year-old for possession of cannabis, that's not going to rule them out being a police officer. So there's lots of good reasons why people have been there, as well as bad reasons. But more importantly, the Police National Database, PND, has a much wider intelligence set of arrests and other incidents that go beyond convictions. So we've washed the data. Technical people understand what this means better than I do. We've washed all of our data, of our personnel data, so all of our people, officers and staff, against the PND to look, are there officers or staff who've had contact with the police that may be troubling that we don't know about? Now, you do that wash and you get a big pile of potential positives, which will include positives and false positives. And then that creates a big manual process to sift through those hits, and that's what we're working on at the moment. And that's that refreshed vetting approach that I've heard talked about. I just wanted to explain it in a bit more detail there. And that's the tactic that we're the first people to do it at scale, and that's a tactic that the Home Secretary has now asked that all forces do that tactic as well. On Monday, I spent a day with professional standards teams across 2 or 3 buildings across London, and the positive thing in all this, all the people in there, they're just ordinary police officers who happen to have moved into those roles, some recently, some long time ago. Their passion and commitment to take this on was really uplifting. The last thing I want to say was about accelerating, trying to find faster ways to deal with this. Louise Casey commented on the speed of our cases, and we're trying to improve that. We are unduly restricted by the nature of our regulations, and that concerns me, and it's great that the Home Secretary and Prime Minister have commissioned a rapid review of some of the rules about dismissals and unsatisfactory performance. But regardless of that, we're trying to find other levers ourselves where we can stretch the existing use of the law a bit further and push the boundaries on that to go as fast as possible in what we're doing. But if I step back just to finish off, you will see progress from us step by step as we chase more trust, less crime and high standards, which I'm focusing on here. We must improve dramatically for London. But lifting the stone and revealing painful truths will not be resolved overnight, and I mustn't pretend it will do, and I hope you understand that that can't be done. We have to prepare for more painful stories as we confront the issues that we face. We've discussed before sort of the systemic failings that create these problems of these officers who corrupt our integrity, and as we put in more resource, more assertive tactics, as we're more open to people reporting incidents to us from within and from without the organisation, as we more determinedly take on these cases, it will tackle the problems that we face, but it won't be rapid, and it will be painful. And in that context, we need your support and the support of people of London. Please don't lose heart as we confront these issues, as we do this necessary and painful work to finally confront those and rid the organisation of those who corrupt our integrity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sir Mark. In relation to that, I'm pleased to hear the vetting is being looked at. Would it be better if it was a vetting service for all of the police commands in England?
I think at the moment, because police technology and data is fragmented, I think doing it centrally would be hard. So there's some national databases, but some local databases we check. I think it would be hard to create a national service, particularly at this difficult time.
Okay. Later in the meeting, we're going to be talking about trust and confidence, but it concerns me greatly, and it must you, that things are going to come out more and more,
yes,
the more you look at. And we look at today's ghastly reporting on PC Hussein Shihab, who admits 4 counts of sexual activity with a girl aged 13 to 15. And then we find out that he had a role as a Safer Schools officer. Do you want to comment on that particular case?
No, it's another ghastly case, isn't it?
Yes.
From what we've seen so far, it does look like his vetting had been done. The sexual contact offences took place before he joined the police, but sadly they weren't known. And then whilst he was in the police, he was taking part in what you might sort of broadly describe as grooming activity. It is ghastly, and it's going to be really, obviously you've got to apologise to the victims. They shouldn't be facing that at the hands of a police officer and their families. But also it's another one of these cases which will trouble the people of London. And I'm sorry for that, and we're going to keep going back to cases like this as we surface them. Yes,
and of course we're all sorry for that, because not only are these cases ghastly, but what it must be doing to the rest of your workforce, who most are absolutely full of integrity and must feel it far more than even we do, which is shocking for them.
They both want this sorted out, and they're massively frustrated that most of the conversation about the Met is about this side of it rather than the amazing work most of them are doing day in and day out.
Yes, and of course, I never got to a question to the Mayor, but we see just how many of our very brave police officers are actually injured at work, and they take all that on board. I mean, those figures are astonishing. Do you feel that you're empowered to lead the change that that is needed to turn the Met round? Are you being assisted by politicians and everybody else? Do you feel supported?
I do at the moment.
Watch this space.
Politics moves quickly, doesn't it? But I do feel very supported at the moment. I found the Mayor consistently and the Home Secretaries I've worked with very supportive. They're troubled by the challenges faced by policing, and they're keen that we progress and turn things around as quickly as possible. And the things that we've asked for are largely being supported, like for example, the review of some of the regulations that we've asked for within by the Home Office, or the Mayor making sort of full use of his sort of powers to sort of help us with our budget this year.
Okay, and you commented to us late last year that there were 100 or so officers that you wouldn't dare put near the public. Is there any way you'll be able to deal with that?
So that's one of the things in Accelerate. We're looking at different ways that we can interpret the regulations and see if we can make more progress on that. Certainly the review work that the Home Office will do should give us new routes to deal with them, but I'm looking at whether we can use more inventive legal measures.
Okay, well, let's hope you can. Just to digress very slightly before we go back into this, obviously a lot has come out about probation in the last couple of days for obvious reasons. And then I read today that one person is killed every 6 days by criminals on probation, which I must say I didn't know. Clearly this is for the whole country, not just London, which is absolutely shocking. Do the problems that probation have got problems, does that increase workload for the police?
I think the Zara Elena case is an awful case, and I think the Director of Probation and the Minister have apologised for the clear mistakes that come out in that case. We try to work really hard with probation. They do recognise their role in protecting the people of London, but clearly they've got issues they need to be able to account for that I can't speak to.
Okay, fair enough. Going back to David Carrick, if I can ask Diana Lutchford, please, at what point was MOPAC made aware of the allegations against David Carrick?
So we were first aware, we were informed of his arrest in October 2021.
Okay, and what is MOPAC doing to support the Met in ensuring that officers like this don't enter the Met? Or what assistance are you giving the Met?
There's a kind of a history to this in the sense that clearly over the years we have been talking to the Met about strengthening misconduct systems, and for example our MOPAC's Evidence and Insight have produced 2 research reports, including one in 2016 identifying the issue of disproportionality in misconduct, which has been published and was actually noted as part of Louise Casey's interim report. So we've been doing research on these issues. Clearly we don't get involved in individual misconduct cases because those are an operational matter. But we have also been talking to the Met over time about supervisory ratios, because obviously it's very difficult for more senior officers to identify negative behaviours or whatever else may be going on, the more officers that they are responsible for supervising. So those are some of the kind of strategic issues that we've been discussing with them. We're also, after the Cousins sentencing, it was of course the Mayor who called for Louise Casey's review to be set up. He sought for that to be commissioned after the Cousins sentencing. So he was, he asked them to establish the independent review, and that followed our very serious concerns about sort of culture within the Met, which the Cousins case demonstrated. And also, of course, we are supporting the Met around the reform of police regulations. So where the legislative framework is inhibiting their efforts to root out corrupt officers, we're working with them to help distill the forthcoming the Home Office review, which I think has actually now kicked off.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that you're helping. The report you mentioned is 5-6 years old. What evidence could you give us that you'd picked up that there were problems with the culture in the Met? Where could we look up that MOPAC was doing its job looking at that?
Well, as I say, we have been working with them on issues like supervisory ratios, and we have been talking to them about the culture, and we are now regularly meeting with colleagues from the Directorate of Professional Standards to discuss learning from cases, how that links to HMIC FRS corruption report recommendations, their wider transformation plans, and any emerging themes and patterns that are coming out of cases. So
point me to something that MOPAC have done that actually indicates that you were concerned about that and brought that to the Commissioner's attention before all this.
Well, obviously, as I say, we don't get involved in individual misconduct cases.
No,
the Mayor's role is
the culture in general.
Well, the culture in general over the past few years, as was evidenced by discussions with the previous commissioner, was a growing area of concern following a series of negative incidents which the Mayor has described this committee on previous occasions, including the deaths of Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman, the Daniel Morgan case, so on and so forth. There was a whole litany of them which reinforced the Mayor's view that an independent review was needed. Which
I know then. It was before, because I'd never picked it up from MOPAC as being an issue, but I'm very pleased to hear you're assisting the Met now. I'll now go to Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, panel. Commissioner, firstly, can I welcome your determination to use your words, improve dramatically. That's very reassuring. Can also commend you for all the work that you've done in the last 3 or 4 months. So it's welcome news. And what I particularly welcome is that I think there's been a change of approach in the Met, away from a mode of self-denial to actually accepting that there are serious issues to be grappled with. Commissioner, your opening statement actually really covered the supplementaries I was going to ask you, but I will still put one question to you, which to some extent you already answered, but I still will put this to you. So regarding David Carrick, how was this violent predator able to serve in the police for a number of years, decades even, and the pattern of his behavior go unnoticed and investigated? What was going wrong? Now, I know in your answer to us what you are doing, sort of you have answered my question to some extent. But in 2017, Thames Valley Police spoke to him. In 2019, he assaulted a woman during a domestic incident. The matter was referred to the Met. It was determined he had no case to answer in relation to misconduct. I mean, what was going in the Met at the time? A different commissioner, but you were part of a very important part of the senior management team as well.
So I think if we look back at this, there's a combination of poor policy and poor decisions. And sort of what I'm not going to say is, well, those policies, well, that was the standards and practices of the day. I don't think that's an acceptable answer if the policies don't make sense. I mean, sometimes we can see why things were different then, but they're different now. Other times it doesn't actually make sense. So I don't think that's a defence for this. I fundamentally think at the core of this is an issue about an allegation is made against an officer. It doesn't meet a criminal standard for prosecution. And many of these were investigated by other police forces outside London, Thames Valley, Hertfordshire, etc. So this isn't simply a Met issue. And let's assume those officers and those forces did the best they could do. For whatever reason, there wasn't enough evidence to prosecute. And obviously that's a decision that involves CPS generally. The question is, what notice do you take of that after that point? And sometimes on an individual case, when you don't have enough evidence to prosecute, you're still left with a worrying intelligence picture. Sometimes after an investigation, you think, actually, we've investigated this, there's little evidence of any concern about the person it was alleged against. Sometimes you see, actually, no, there's enough in this to make us concerned, even though it doesn't reach a criminal threshold. And too often in the past, that wasn't thought about and said, well, no criminal prosecution, nothing further to see here, push it to one side and we can carry on as normal. So that was the individual issue. And then there's the system issue that even if that's the right decision on one case or two cases, you start to get more cases not looking at the system point. And Louise Casey, in her interim review, she's got her final review coming in the next couple of months, her interim review, which focused on the misconduct process, one of her points, if you recall, was, I think her phrase was about joining the dots, actually seeing these patterns of behaviour. And certainly with this individual, even if individual cases didn't provide a lot of evidence to justify dramatic intervention, as you start to see the pattern build over the years, it certainly should have done and it didn't. So that's what we've got to fix, which is why we go into Anti-Corruption Abuse Command. Part of the resources there about increased intelligence, looking at our vetting again, because of course the 1,000 people who we're looking at in Project Onyx are across more than 1,000 cases. So some of them have got multiple cases, as you might expect. So that systematic look has not been done as wisely as it could be. So that's the failing, and that's what we've got to fix. And I'm sure underneath it there's probably some cultural issues. It's not just system and policy. I've described there's some cultural issues in terms of people's judgment. But fundamentally, those are the failings that cause, and that's why I think when you look at the sort of actions I went through, and I'm not going to repeat them all again, you can see how they're picking off the sort of systemic issues in terms of vetting and data, looking at the picture, being more proactive, more resources in that space. It's all about the same issue.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Pigeon.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the detail at the beginning, which probably answers some questions we may be planning later on, but actually shows how much is going on. You said 1,000 people have been pulled out from this big review you've done. But how many are there outside of that 1,000, such as the case we've had today, that you know are going through the justice system that we might see coming out in the coming weeks and months?
So, I mean, looking at the sort of just the next few weeks ahead, most weeks there's 2 or 3 officers going to court for criminal cases, which tends to be a mix of sort of dishonesty, violence, and sort of violence against women and girls type offences, domestic abuse, sexual offences, etc. So there's probably 2 or 3 a week that are sort of appearing at court. It's hard to know when these cases will come to conclusion because sometimes they leap forward because something that was a court process hearing, all of a sudden someone decides to change and plead to guilty. So exactly when these cases are finalised isn't always clear. But there's a trickle of them, and we're going to be surfacing more, as I said earlier.
Of course you are, but there's already 2 or 3 a week you're expecting to come out, which is horrific. How long is it going to take you to get through this 1,000 odd cases?
So I've said we're trying to moving heaven and earth. We've got to do it thoroughly to have got through it all by the end of March, and I said I'll report publicly at that point. And what that will say is, well, we've gone through the 1,000. There were sort of X that actually we're happy, we're not concerned about. There are Y that we're now putting into vetting reviews. There are Z that we're now putting into fresh investigations. So sort of it'll be that sort of update we'll be able to get to. That's what we're looking to do.
That's the initial bit, and then there'll be months, obviously.
And the months of doing those, yeah, exactly.
And in terms of your boosted professional standards unit dealing with this work, how many officers have you got in there, and how confident are you about the quality and integrity of those officers, given we saw come out recently a constable in that particular unit is now being investigated over alleged sexual assault of a female colleague? That worries me, that you've got people in there who may have a different judgment and may review cases in the wrong way because perhaps their own behaviour has not always been good. Yeah,
we've worked hard on the vetting of the people in that unit. I was with them yesterday, and I was impressed by the people I met. I mean, sort of, and for example, on the sort of sexual offending side, we've basically built a. You've looked at in the past. I think you've had a recent session with Commander Southworth about our public protection work more generally. We've basically built a public protection team in sort of professional standards. So those officers who are highly skilled at dealing with victims of rape, sexual assault, domestic abuse, because of all the nuances that come with those cases in terms of specialist evidence gathering, the particular importance of victim support, and the particular tactics in doing that in a way that works for women who are victims of such crimes. So we've actually built a dedicated. So all the officers in that, so a large part of them have got specialist experience in that world, led by a very impressive detective superintendent. So we're trying to get all the right skills and capabilities in there to be able to do as good a job as we can do. The total number, I can't remember the total number. We can come back to you on that. Sort of, we increased it by about 30%, but I can come back to you with the exact numbers.
Really helpful. That's good to hear. And then, as part of this almost retrospective work you're doing, there is an issue that officers will have left the police and staff, and there may be reasons for that, the behaviour of colleagues and so on. I was reading a really interesting piece in one of the newspapers, iNews, about an officer who left within 11 months. So he'd come from the criminal justice service. They had a lot of experience that could really benefit the police, and it was a culture of dehumanising language, cutting corners, the sort of words she used, or she has used, to describe how they call members of the public, the team she was with. Now, clearly, this is not all police officers, but are you going to look at talking to officers who've left to find out if there are particular reasons, again, to feed into this massive cultural review that you're doing?
Yeah, so we have done some of that, and we're always interested in that feedback. And it's very obvious, isn't it, that our attrition. So as we look at recruiting and attrition, our attrition is higher than we would like it to be, and it must be possible, and it's likely to be true that some of that is because some people are having a bad experience.
Yes.
One of the things that struck me when the Louise Casey report was published, and we were talking about that and talking with officers about how this is not pervasive, because lots of officers have very positive experiences, and I had sort of young black officers say to me, "I'm angry about this report because this isn't true. This is a fantastic organisation. It's the best place I've ever worked." But then you have another black officer doing the same job on a different team saying, "It's exactly true, and I'm angry because you haven't dealt with this." Which sort of, it goes to the point about this is pockets. But it's too many pockets that exist because systematically we haven't been good enough. That's the challenge. So it's finding those pockets. And one of the things for the Anti-Corruption Abuse Command to do is to be more proactive, using more sort of covert techniques. We're just going live with our sort of lawful business monitoring, which is about being able to monitor internal communications more more intrusively where there's good cause. So using all those tactics where we identify teams that we are concerned about.
Lovely. And exit interviews, of course, as
exactly,
well.
Yeah,
Lovely.
exactly.
I'll leave it there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. And of course, the Fire Brigade are finding exactly the same. There's pockets of issues. Colleagues, we're going to have to step up the pace, please. Assembly Member Mayema.
Thank you. My question is for Sir Mark. My first one has been answered. But I just wanted to ask you, so Londoners will note that David Carrick is from the same command as Wayne Couzens. And we've heard in the past, there are some bad apples, but it's got to the point where there are so many bad apples, perhaps we need to throw out the whole barrel. And I say that not to kind of say that that's necessarily what needs to happen, but I wonder where you are along that journey, if those pockets are just so intractable, how that's being addressed, if there are clear issues in certain areas.
So I think it's really important that no one interprets me saying there's pockets, that it's a few bad apples. It's more than that. I think I've been very clear about that. There are sort of system failings. And that's the challenge, about being really clear that the majority of our people are really good people and they care about policing London. That's the tens of thousands. But the hundreds have got more traction, and there's more of them because we haven't been strong enough and systematically strong enough. And so I'm not going to talk about particular commands generally. We are looking at units, functions, and working out where do we have warning signs of problematic culture. That might be about high complaints records, it might be about internal reporting, it could be a whole range of different, it could be about the demographics of the team and the movement of people in and out and what that looks like. Clearly, parliamentary and diplomatic protection, there's been more than one concerning issue, and so we've been doing a big review of that. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Helen Millechap has been leading that, and that's coming to a conclusion and looking at what are the system issues that affect the culture in that environment, and they're finding some quite significant issues. It's an unusual setup, protecting a whole load of premises, armed officers having to be on post at particular times, and the way it's been constructed has undermined the ability of supervisors to supervise, just the setting of hours and rotas, etc. And that's a long conversation that is not for now. But fundamentally, so we're looking at those system issues that can set up the leaders and the team to be successful together, as well as dealing with the sort of toxic individuals such as the ones you mentioned.
Thank you. That's really good to hear and reassuring. Really quickly, I just wanted to ask you if you're confident that the Met's going to meet the deadline of the 31st of March to identify people from the wash that you talked about of the police national computer.
I'm going to tell hell and high water to get there. There's a lot to get through, but we're determined to try and do that.
Thank you. Assembly Member Devonish.
Thank you. Good morning, Sir Mark. I wanted to get back a point you made a little bit earlier in terms of the morale of your staff, specifically with this drip of these poisonous cases, 2 or 3 a week you're saying are going to come through. What are you actually doing to raise or increase or defend morale internally, and to reassure your officers and civilian staff there's a better future, a better Met going forward, please?
So generally publicly, I try to keep coming back to the point that we have tens of thousands of great people. Unfortunately, that's never the bit that gets reported, frankly, and so it frustrates them. They understand why that is, but it's frustrating for good people who are in a profession and care about what they do. So keep trying to get the positive stories out there, but there isn't always the bandwidth for them. Internally, there are when we talk about sort of plans going forward and the sort of draft strategy we've published recently, the turnaround plan, one of the strands in there is about setting officers up to succeed, because they feel there are various issues about how their duties are managed, about their equipment, about technology, the whole range of issues like that which could be better. So trying to make sure that their working environments and the tools and equipment and support they feel around them is as good as it can be, because they don't feel it is at the moment. I think that's a fair judgment, and we're going to try and tackle that.
And in terms of specific numbers, have you got any retention figures? Because clearly we're in a wonderful jobs market in London at the moment, and they can all go and get a better job elsewhere in terms of money. So in terms of retention numbers, have you got anything you can publish to show that number hasn't gone down, dipped during this crisis over the last year or so? And if it has, how it's going to go back up in terms of retention, please?
So we can sort of write in due course with sort of detailed numbers, but over the last year, our aspiration to grow our police numbers in line with sort of national and local investment is getting more and more difficult. We are going to be high hundreds behind our target for the end of March. I think we've said some of that publicly before, but I'll say it again. So that is a combination of sort of it's both the recruitment and the retention. So the retention issues are steadily creeping up in terms of the numbers leaving, and recruiting. I think we've recruited somewhere around 9,500 in the last 3 years. So I think there's an element of there's probably only so many people who want to be police officers, and you sort of start to sort of exhaust the market. There's certainly the pay competitiveness. I'm very concerned about police officer pay, and some of the stories I hear and some of the research that has been published recently about that. So I think, but sort of clearly, the operating environment and the sort of and the public debate will affect those issues as well. And so we are looking hard at what can we do to try and improve that. But it's very difficult, and there's the next pay round of reviews is really important for police officers, I think.
Thank you. Of course, there's the extra PCSOs coming in, which is very welcome. Do they go through exactly the same vetting as police officers?
I'd have to double check that. It's very similar. It's certainly very similar. I think there's a little bit more that police officers have, but it's very similar.
Actually, if at some point that we could be told about that, I'd be grateful. Assemblymember Russell.
Yes, I just wanted to pick up on the Safer Schools officer issue that has come out today. You said that the sexual misconduct offences happened before that officer joined the police, and then the grooming activity happened while he was working in the police as a Safer Schools officer. So that obviously has huge implications in terms of vetting and safeguarding, and also makes one wonder whether are you thinking about what the role of Safer Schools officers is? You know, what are police officers doing in schools? Are they being used in a constructive way to divert young people from the criminal justice system, or is it actually introducing risk into our schools? We've had child Q. This isn't the first case of a problem happening within the setting of a school. So do you have any advice for head teachers who have Safer Schools officers in their schools? So
this is obviously a concerning case, and our sort of local BCU command teams are speaking, are communicating with head teachers, and we'll update them. We do extra vetting for schools officers. The issues in this case is, sadly, none of the offences that he committed before joining the police had been reported until more recently, so there was no way we could have known about that. So it looks like the vetting procedures were sort of sensible, but sadly he was clearly an inappropriate person, we now know, to be in a school. We've got a bit more work to do to double check whether there's anything we could have done to spot that. In terms of the role going forward, as part of, you've heard me talk about strongest ever neighbourhood policing, and sort of schools officers are a part of police and communities working together to deal with issues. The vast majority of people I see in sort of in education welcome that sort of positive relationship and working, as you say, to divert people from crime. Spotting problems early and helping divert young people out of crime has to be an ambition, particularly when we see issues like county lines and those areas where young people, perhaps at a difficult moment in their growing up, get drawn into those issues, and spotting that early between teachers and police and trying to find ways to deal with it, I think, is really important. So that's the mission. We've clearly got a tragic case here, but that shouldn't deter us from the positive work that schools officers working with teachers and others to reduce crime.
Mm-hmm. It emphasises the importance of safeguarding, because it sounds like if the other issues hadn't been reported before he went through the vetting process, then the grooming in the school was the first activity, and so it's, you know, what I suppose the thing to take away is what can you learn from that to protect other people in other schools, and it'll be interesting to see how that work goes forward.
Agreed.
Thank you.
I think it also shows that people, if there is a crime committed, must report it as soon as they possibly can, because as in this case, then at least you'd have been alerted to it before the gentleman was put into schools. Okay, Assembly Member Garrett.
Morning. Two quick issues that have come up, if I may, Sir Mark. Firstly, this question of, you mentioned 2 to 3 officers per week is the sort of par rate of officers going through the court. I just wondered, what does the historical trend of that look like, and what does the future, in your hopes and dreams, look like? Is that just a kind of baseline level of people who you would just expect to see? Because it feels to me like quite a high number, even for an organisation of 35,000 odd people.
It's a higher number than I wanted to be in the long term, but it's sort of, we're going to see a lot happening over the forthcoming months. And I mean, so all of these so for example, all these extra reports coming in at the moment from our appeals, some of those will turn into criminal investigations. If one of those reported today becomes a criminal investigation, if it's a guilty plea, it probably won't be till sometime in 2024, and if it's a trial, it might not be till 2025. Just to give you a sense of sort of, particularly with the current logjam in the criminal justice system in London. So that's a sense of the timeline that we're going to face. We have historic records in terms of, I think, dismissals, etc. The number appearing at court, I think, it's not something we have reliable data on, frankly. What I see is what I can see coming up in the next few weeks. And of course, some of those cases appear multiple times. I think, well, they might plead guilty today, or they might go to trial. So that name in this week's 2 or 3 is the same name in the 2 or 3 in a month's time and 3 months' time as well. So it's just the ongoing business.
Okay, fair enough. The other question that came up was about retention, and also about assaults on police officers, which is, you know, unfortunately part of the line of work of a police officer. So so my question is, how well are frontline officers, supported if they're assaulted in their work? How are they supported, not just in terms of immediate first aid, but in terms of the sense of, this is an organisation that is looking after me and that is going after the person and taking seriously the fact that a person has assaulted me in the line of my work? Is that something that the Met's always been good at? Is it something that you're working to improve? So
we have there's a protocol, there's a national protocol that we follow. So Hampshire Police developed this, and so in the Met we call this Op Hampshire, because everything has to have an operational name, doesn't it? Which is something that Diana says. But sort of there's a set of protocols about the follow-on with officers. So there's the welfare side of it. Another key part of it is actually treating them as a victim. One of the issues in the past was it was not treating an officer as a victim in the same way you would a member of the public. So you've gone through a traumatic incident. Well, you write your own statement. It sort of used to be. It isn't that anymore. So it's being sort of more sympathetic in that way. But it starts right at the scene. We had an incident a week ago where an officer was badly assaulted, making an arrest, and his heart stopped, and his life was saved by his colleagues with a defibrillator. And that's the second time that's happened in my 4 months as Commissioner, that we have an officer who's alive because colleagues literally saved their life with immediate first aid, and that sort of really sort of upsets and troubles me that happens that frequently. But the support from colleagues is fantastic.
I think made me ask the question. It was a story that I was reading this morning. It was outside the Met, but it was an officer who was assaulted. The person who assaulted him was only given a caution. Part of the caution was to write a letter of apology to the officer. So firstly, the officer was annoyed that the level of sanction was just a caution. And secondly, the sanction within the caution of writing the letter of apology never even happened. The force didn't seem, to this officer's mind, very keen on making it happen. And eventually he left the force because he thought, this is not a place that values my time or my injuries. Is that the sort of thing that a Met officer might face?
I would hope not, frankly. I would hope not. I wanted to take these issues seriously. I think there are at least sentencing guidelines and sort of expectations in terms of sentencing for this area, but I do think it could be taken more seriously, the assaults on police officers. I think it is a big issue, and I think it should be seen like sort of, I know, contempt of court or something. It's actually sort of fundamentally obstructing and impeding justice in a very a completely unacceptable way, and it should be seen as something which in a large portion of cases people get custodial sentences.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Thank you, and I agree with that. Protect the protectors is something I've always absolutely supported. Unfortunately, with all these things coming out, it sort of muddies the water somewhat, and that's not fair to all those exceptionally good officers out there.
Absolutely.
Who we will thank every single day for what they do, putting themselves in so much danger. Nevertheless, we must get through this very difficult time. Our next section is on trust and confidence, which of course is all ties into what we've just been talking about. Colleagues, we are running very late, as you will know. If your question has been covered, please don't ask it again. So first of all, we're going to go to Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, panel. Ms Ludford, what specific work is MOPAC doing to support the Met in rebuilding trust and confidence, including action to reduce disproportionalities in levels of trust between different groups of Londoners?
So we've taken significant action to help address the issue of trust and confidence, and of course that is why terrible incidents like Carrick are of such great concern, because they further damage the trust and confidence of Londoners, which means, you know, this is an ongoing issue for us. I mean, for example, we've overseen a whole-scale overhaul of the Met's gangs matrix due to the annual reviews which MOPAC conducted, which has resulted in more than 1,200 people who are deemed low risk being taken off the matrix. And in fact, the database is now at its lowest number since 2012, which we hope will increase trust and confidence. One of the really significant things was, of course, the Mayor's action plan to improve trust and confidence, particularly among black communities. And I'm sure that Kenny can give more detail about that, but that was particularly about the disproportionate use of police powers on black Londoners. As a result of the road traffic stops pilot within the action plan, which saw the Met recording vehicle stops to make sure that they are identifying any disproportionality relating to ethnicity, that has actually now been picked up in the National Police Race Action Plan. They've taken our lead, and they're developing a new code of practice to drive change in that area. We've also been scrutinising the Met's use of strip searching for some time, indeed prior to the publication of the Child Q report, through the MOPAC Oversight Board, which is something that we committed to as part of the action plan. And we're beginning to see some results from that very, very important work. For example, in the last quarter, the Met conducted 16 more thorough, intimate part searches on children, which represents a 64% reduction on last year, which is really, really positive. And we're also doing work to progress tackling disproportionality in youth justice, and many other things. I don't know if there's anything you'd wish to add, particularly on the action plan, Kenny.
Sorry, forgive me, Mr. Bowie. We're running out of time.
Okay,
Thank you,
sure.
Ms. Ludford. That was quite thorough. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, but before I ask my question, I'd just like to pay tribute to the officers that save not only their colleagues' lives every day, but members of the public's lives. In my constituency, as you know, just before Christmas, there was the awful incident of the O2 Academy in Brixton, and I would publicly like to reiterate again and pay tribute to the officers who saved members of the public's lives that night, and I don't think that's spoken about enough. So thank you to those officers. I was lucky enough just a few days ago to do a night shift from Peckham Police Station on a Friday night with a team, and I really cannot impress how impressed I was with the professionalism. We had a suicide attempt, we had a stabbing, and just watching how the officers dealt with that like a machine. You know, they went in like a machine. It was an amazing thing to do, and watching the officers in action was amazing.
Thank you.
Going back to my questions, Commissioner, what are the immediate priorities for the turnaround board? How will these be delivered? Who sits on it, and how many times has it met?
Thank you. So we've been creating a turnaround plan which we published last week. So I'm determined that we get on with things in a hurry because there's a lot to do, and so we've developed a plan, and I'm keen to get feedback on it. So rather than hesitating, we need to get on and do some things. And so having done some sort of initial pushes on certain themes in the first 3 months, wanted to do that. That plan takes account of HMIC reports, various other reviews like Morgan and some of the other things that Don has mentioned. It takes account of our performance issues, takes account of the fact we're in the engaged process, takes account of the Casey report. And so we've tried to pull all that together, and it really does 3 things. It says, so under the headline of sort of we're going to deliver more trust, less crime, high standards, it's like, how are we going to measure and assess that and drive performance improvements? How are we going to deal with improving the way our values build a healthy organisation that everyone succeeds in? And what are the priorities for change? What are the most important things we have to tackle to improve what we do for London? And those are those 9 priorities for change. As part of doing that, I was keen that we sort of look outside for others' ideas and comments. And so the turnaround board is helping us as a challenge panel and sort of to help criticise, challenge and improve the quality of that plan. So we've got community representatives, we've got HMIC are there, we've got a local authority chief exec, obviously MOPAC are there, so sort of except so, and it's met 3 or 4 times since I started, and it's going to keep meeting as that external challenge so that our planning isn't just on our own. The other thing it's doing, so we've also got the chair of the College of Policing, Chief Constable Andy Marsh. The other thing we're looking for is to bring in best practice from elsewhere. So the College of Policing say, well, actually, if you're trying to fix this issue, Force X is really good at that, and HMIC can help as well. So it's about getting outside in help and getting different opinions as we try and focus on where we're going. And of course, this plan is only a working draft. We're going to crack on with it, but over the next 3 months, before we get to the 1st of April, we'll have Louise Casey's next report, there'll be other things, and we'll get feedback from perhaps yourselves and others, and that will lead to sort of refinement of it.
Thank you very much. Commissioner, could you tell us a little bit about the Leadership Academy and what you are hoping this will deliver and what progress has been made in establishing it?
We don't invest enough in our leaders. That's an absolute challenge for us. Almost the vast majority of leadership training that officers get is entirely operational. So learning to be a firearms commander or a senior detective, which is about, and those technical skills are of course important, but in terms of leading and managing teams of staff, setting standards, thinking about how you connect to London and how you police a city as complex as London. We don't put very much investment in that. An interesting comparison, if you look at our chief superintendents who are running big units with maybe 1,500 officers, if you compare those to colonels in the army, an army colonel since leaving Sandhurst will have had 72 weeks of leadership development. Our chief superintendents, if they've had a handful, they're lucky. That is an extraordinary difference. So now, I'm not going to be doing 72 weeks of it. That's sort of if only. But my stake in the ground, I want every leader in the Met to be getting a week's leadership development each year. That's the stake in the ground that I put, and that's what the Academy is going to try and deliver. So we're going to sort of try and repurpose some of Hendon is probably the right answer to this. We want to work with the College of Policing. We want to work with perhaps a London sort of like business school type institution. And we want to work with London's communities and some of the groups in terms of how we do that. The team at the moment are focusing on developing a package for sergeants for the next couple of years.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And on the back of what Assembly Member Ahmed said, I would urge anybody that scrutinises the police or throws stones at them, comments on them, to actually go out on some of these police shifts, from literally walking the beat. So I've been out with the firearm officers, etc. Their professionalism is astounding, and perhaps it would make people think twice before they just freely throw bricks at you, as it were. Assembly Member Devonish.
Well said. Well said, Chair. And short answers, please, Sir Mark, to these questions, because we're behind time. What are the key learning points from the innovation hubs the Met held across London, and how will the Met take this forward to improve trust and confidence, please?
So those have been focused on different crime reduction initiatives in local areas, getting different groups together. I don't have a sort of hit list of top 4 or 5 things, but perhaps I can write back to you afterwards.
That would be great. You have said that the Met will, quote, will build the strongest ever neighbourhood policing model this city has ever seen, end quote. What does this actually look like? When will Londoners expect to see real change? And can I just add one further point? The 500 PCSOs that have been announced by the Mayor a couple of weeks ago, how will that demonstrate change in addition to what we're discussing?
So we have... There's multiple issues to be dealt with here. At the core of this, I want policing that is, I've described it as community crime fighting, precise community crime fighting. So police and communities tackling crime together. That's how we succeed best. Policing shouldn't be imposed. It should be done jointly. And we haven't always got that tone right. The neighbourhood policing resources are the cornerstone of that approach, but they're not the whole of it. So just starting there, our neighbourhood policing resources are lower than they were a decade ago for a whole range of obvious reasons that you'll understand. I want to rebuild that. The number of police officers there, on paper, is comparable to what it was a decade ago, but the abstraction levels are too high, and that's something you've discussed here before. So getting that more reliable is important. PCSO-wise, we're about 1,600 fewer than we were a decade ago in neighbourhoods, and keen to improve that, and it's great to have the money to start that scale. And we're looking at the role of PCSOs and police officers in neighbourhoods, the work they do, how they have the most impact on crime, how to improve engagement. We're looking at new technologies to get a better, more granular understanding of different communities' concerns. Alongside that, we're going to be looking at how the rest of the Met connects into community policing and connects into neighbourhoods to support their activity.
Thank you. I'm told we've recruited now 16,753 of the promised 20,000 government promise. Can you provide an update on when you expect to meet the target of recruiting an additional, the figures 4,557 officers here in London, and what discussion have you had with the Home Office about that, please?
So I think those numbers you're using there are the national numbers.
Yes,
I would love to be recruiting 20,000 more officers.
Indeed.
So if you've got a checkbook for that, then I'd be very, very, very grateful. So our share of it, I say we've recruited 9,500 officers in the last 3 years. I think the time span is we're struggling to get to the finish line in terms of getting quite as high as we need to, as I said earlier, with the conversation about recruitment and retention. And I think we might fall sort of high hundreds short of our target by the end of the year. And we're looking hard at what levers we can pull to try and catch that back up. But it is a difficult environment. All the reasons discussed earlier: pay meets reputation, etc.
And could you write to me on the point that we discussed earlier as well about retention as well as recruitment? That would be really, in more detail, be really useful to the committee.
Okay.
Thank you, Sir Mark.
Okay, the problem is recruitment, isn't it? It's not because there isn't the money there. It's just
absolutely.
Fine, thank you. Assembly Member Sahota.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
And let me echo the comments made by my colleagues of the gratitude we owe to the Metropolitan Police for the hard work you do, and particularly for West London Borough Commander, who keeps me well informed of the issues in my part of the world.
Great.
You've appointed Professor Lawrence Sherman as the Met's first Chief Scientific Officer. Can you please clarify the remit of the role and the initial focus of the work, of his work?
Yeah, so I'm determined that we are intelligence-led and evidence-based. So the evidence of best practice. Larry Sherman brings with him he's a globally renowned criminologist. He's latterly professor at Cambridge Criminology Department. What we're looking to do is to bring all that best practice to London and get more rigorous in terms of our working out what works. And some of this is about how you apply data science. You'll have heard me talk previously about using data science to get better at identifying London's most dangerous predatory offenders, because we've got tens of thousands of men in London who, over the last few years, have got convictions or intelligence about domestic abuse, child abuse, rape, sexual assault, etc. Actually being able to prioritise that requires data and an analytical approach that leans on criminological evidence. So it's that sort of thing is what we're looking to do. Likewise, we're going to use the same evidence-based approach to thinking about how do we allocate the 500 PCSOs? How do you do that to best effect? If you want to deliver more trust and less crime, where's the best place to put them?
So Professor Sherman will also be looking not only at the data collection, but also what data is relevant, because there's a difference between data and useful information.
Absolutely. So he's got a background in all sorts of research using data to inform policing, and I say widely cited on global best practice, but across things like we've discussed, or stop and search practice. How do you do stop and search differently that increases trust? How do you bring ideas like procedural justice to stop and search? So there's a range of things that we're looking at, and we're he's been in post 2 or 3 months, and we're just finalising the work programme that we're working to.
Thank you, Chair.
It's fascinating. We'll be watching that. Thank you. Assembly Member Pigeon.
Just picking up on the data point. Obviously, we touched on earlier about the issues with probation, the prison service, this awful case, Zara Alina, that's been in the news again this week. As you develop these tools within the Met, what will you be doing, or will you be doing anything with probation, the prison service, for them to be able to use these tools, because you're putting this investment in that can help keep Londoners safe?
Very, very keen to do that. There is increasing evidence that data analysis can massively improve upon human-only risk assessment. You still want... We don't want a minority report environment, if anyone's seen that film, where this is also all done by computers. That's not the intention. But when you've got big volumes of data and complex environments, technology can help people make better decisions, and there's evidence in risk assessment that can be very effective.
Good. I hope you're able to share that tool. And can I just go back to you talk about the Leadership Academy? All that is really good to hear. But are you doing a review of Hendon and how fit for purpose it is in terms of the new policing way forward that you want to develop? Because, a lot of the ex-officers there, the staff there, may be very good. They may be old school, though, and you may want to be refreshing that. So are you looking to review Hendon?
So, Hendon's a site more than an academy at the moment, but so we are looking at our recruit training certainly at the moment. As I say, there isn't enough leadership training, and that's why we're doing this investment. It's not just our thinking. So we've got the College of Policing involved. We're looking to work with business schools. We want to work with community groups. So this is this is not going to be a Met-only design. I see this very much as a partnership.
And so Hendon will be kind of refreshed in all its training.
Exactly.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We're now moving on to reducing crime, which of course hopefully will...
I did say I wanted to come in.
Oh, beg your pardon. We're not moving on, but we'll be quick though, won't we, Assembly Member? Microphone, please.
Commissioner, I'm sure you will have seen the reporting of the Met's multiple failures in the Sana Mohammed case, including making no effort to contact the killer and ignoring discovery of a burglary bag outside of her house in a deliberate attempt to avoid paperwork. Commissioner, can you reassure this committee and Londoners that these failures won't happen again and the Met do take the issue of violence against women and girls seriously?
I need to write back to you on that case.
Okay, fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Fine. Oh, sorry.
I think you meant to come in under Section 3. But anyway.
No. And one final question, Commissioner. Commissioner, so trust and confidence, which is what this section is all about, is about people's own personal experiences, cultural issues, but also perceptions. So it's in that context that I ask you this question. I wrote to you yesterday regarding the Partygate inquiry and asking you to reopen it. I know you will respond in due course, but I do want to point out that I also feel that this is a key issue for trust and confidence in the Met. The police should operate without fear and favor, and the public need to know that criminality is properly investigated wherever it takes place, that you will go where the evidence takes you, that there is not one law, as many people say it, most people say it, I would say, for the rich and powerful, and another law for others. Wouldn't you agree?
No.
So you do accept that should be one law for the rich and powerful?
There was about 5 questions there,
yeah.
and I'm not agreeing with all of them.
Yeah.
The Met, before I returned, put a lot of resources into doing a big, thorough inquiry, which has now concluded. I've got a lot of very important things to do for Londoners, and it would take something startling to cause me to reopen that, which I think is unlikely.
Okay, thank you.
Well, let's see what the Commons Privileges Committee comes up with.
Okay, meanwhile, back in London...
no, we are in London.
Yes, I know.
Affecting Londoners. We're not very happy with people partying whilst they were obeying COVID rules,
right,
Chair.
Okay, thank you very much for that interjection. We're now moving on to reducing crime, which of course will help with trust and confidence. It's being started by my colleague, Assembly Member Russell.
Thank you, Chair. And just briefly, just going back to the piece about Professor Lawrence Sherman, it was good to hear you say you don't want a minority report situation. Yes. Will you be publishing information so Londoners understand what data is being used in policing and what and how it is being used in this more data-driven policing environment?
Any big strides we make to do things very differently, we'll be very transparent about them.
Okay, thank you very much. Moving on to the reducing crime piece, you've talked about the more trust, less crime, higher standards, and I'm just briefly but broadly, can you say what concerns you most about current crime trends in London, and relating that to your turnaround plan, what part of the turnaround plan is going to be the most challenging to deliver?
I'm not sure I'm particularly concerned about one part of it. Possibly the culture and leadership side is particularly challenging, but actually I think the challenge is the scale of the overall plan and sequencing it and managing those things alongside them each other. I think when you look at if you read it and think about the work to do under each of those 9 change priorities, if you add all that together, that's not something that you can rush through in a year and tick off all those. There's a lot of planning, a lot of sequencing. There's difficult issues around technology. There's all sorts of issues around people and training and development, and so choreographing the whole thing is the bigger challenge, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And so taking it back to one particular area of the turnaround plan, so item 3, we're going to we will provide a compassionate and effective service to victims and other members of the public. And one of the ways you're going to deliver that is to ensure attendance at every home burglary,
yes,
and that it gets reported. So how have you achieved the 80% attendance at residential burglaries in just a few months? And how have officers made time for that? And has anything been deprioritised to make space for it?
We haven't explicitly deprioritised, and that's the challenge in this. It's not a massive number of incidents, so it is manageable within the workload. The 80% number is slightly misleading, because I think we're probably attending pretty much all the burglaries of people's homes. The challenge is, a few years ago, the classification was widened, so a crime is classified as a burglary dwelling even if someone just goes into your shed and steals a pair of shears. So it's not actually in your home. So the classification for the Home Office crime counting rules is very wide. Mm-hmm. My promise is about burglaries of people's home, because that's the intrusive bit. Discovering when you go out in spring that sometime in the past 6 months something's gone out your shed is not the same as someone invading your home, is it? So that 80% of burglary dwelling classification, I'm pretty confident includes pretty much all invasions of people's homes, and we're trying to quality assure the data in a different way to be certain of that.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, Commissioner.
Good morning.
Good morning. Can you confirm the scope and purpose of Operation Tenacity, please?
Yes, thank you. So, Tenacity is an operation to show how we can be more focused going after the most dangerous offenders. And so we did that over 3 months before Christmas, and we arrested 2,530 dangerous offenders. We were looking at issues such as wanted offenders, absconders from court, various lists that we have, and I'm saying, can we reduce the numbers that are outstanding if we're more focused on that? And so those 2,530 included 153 rape suspects, 106 for robbery, 174 burglars, etc., etc. And so it was very positive. And it's that data-led approach that will help us bring crime down further by being precise, going at, so who are the most dangerous people? How do we use our limited resources to best effect for London?
And do you have a figure on how many arrests have been made as a result?
So it was 2,530 leading up to Christmas.
Oh, that was the actual number of arrests?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Sorry, I misheard you there. Okay, thank you. And so what progress do you think you've made in your first 100 days to tackle serious and organised crime? And what do you feel are the next steps?
So my first 100 days was really just about testing some new tactics as we started to build the turnaround plan. I think two things I would highlight on the success on organised crime. Firstly, our work tackling drug supply in London, which is more about reducing violence. So work that started about 18 months, 2 years ago on county lines, we've stepped up the resources in that work, and if you like, started doing work on what you might call city lines, so the lines selling drugs within London rather than those selling them further afield. We're increasing the number of arrests we're making. We get about, I think, well over 90% guilty pleas on those cases because of the methodology we're using, using phone data and other things to convict people. What we're finding of the sort of tens of people a week we're arresting for drug supply who are running these lines, these are men of violence. 1 in 10 of them have previously been arrested for murder. 1 in 6 of them have been previously arrested for firearms offences. 1 in 3 have been previously arrested for grievous bodily harm. Well over 80% have got previous convictions for some sort of weapons or violence offences. And so by going after the men of violence behind the drugs lines, you're having an effect on violence in London. And of course, some of the spin-offs of those operations are safeguarding cases where you've got some of the young teenagers who've been coerced and pressured into delivering the drugs on their behalf. I think that's partly behind our success over the last year in terms of reducing murder, where murder was down about by about, I think, 16 or 17% last year. Half the number of teenage suicides in 2022 compared to 2021. And I think a big part of the success in that has been this drive on this activity. The second highlight would be where we're experimenting with new methodologies to deal with the sort of plague of online fraud, and our work we've spoken about before with Operation Elaborate, where we arrested a couple hundred people using a sort of an online fraud selling website, frankly, fraud methodology selling. And that's a massive operation, and we've contacted, I think, 60 or 70,000 victims who we think have been victims of those offenders.
Thank you. That's very, very promising. So theft from person, sanction detection rates are about 0.7%. Theft from motor vehicle is about 0.4%, according to the figures I'm giving here, and taking a motor vehicle 0.9%. What is the Met doing to catch more of these criminals, or to improve the sanction detection rate?
So we are trying to catch more criminals. I think if I sort of step back and so if we have a conversation about crime performance on serious violence, we're doing well. Our detection rates on rape and sexual assault are going up. They still need to be higher, but they're sort of in the better half of the country. We're doing well in terms of reducing a whole range of different crime types. Our problem at the moment is robbery and theft from the person. Sort of street robbery and theft from the person. Those are the two that are ticking up most concerningly. I think they're still behind where they were in some ways pre-lockdown, but they are concerning. So we're doing a lot of operations on that, sort of patrols, hotspots, arrests, etc. But it's something we've got to make more progress on.
Thank you for your honesty on that. So, in your first 100 days, and since the murder of Sarah Everard, what improvements have you made on the safety of women and girls in London?
So, if we look at our, we're putting more of our police resources into the public protection environment. We're trying to strengthen that area because the caseload there is overstretched. There've been a whole range of initiatives working with women across London to identify vulnerable locations. We've done proactive patrols. We've made very powerful arrests. There was a very impressive arrest by a couple of officers just a couple of weeks ago who identified a predatory male who was literally out there with equipment to attack a woman with. So we're making a lot of progress on those cases. Our detection rates, I mentioned earlier, have gone up. So we are doing a lot in that space, but there is so much more to do.
Thank you. When violent and prolific offenders, let's say such as Jordan McSweeney, are released from prison, are the Met made aware of this, and what plans do they put in place to monitor them?
So it depends on the level of risk, but the most serious risk of offenders are there's joint activity between police and probation. There are often joint boards in terms of joint risk assessment boards and coming up with plans in terms of what police will do and what they will do. That's how the system works at the highest end of risk. But there are there's a great volume which the police will get told of routinely. I think pretty much all prison releases, but many of them are low risk individuals, and there's perhaps some follow-up from probation service if someone's on licence, but many of those cases the police don't have an active role in.
Do the Met have any power to, say, ask the probation service to maybe monitor the person in the way of, say, an ankle monitor or something?
So in the highest risk cases, the conditions that are put on somebody being released from prison is discussed between police and probation, and so the more you get towards the most dangerous offenders in terms of violence against women and girls, or ex-murderers, terrorists, etc., then the more there's a case conference approach and a lot of thinking about what are the best measures and controls you can put around somebody. The more you get towards lower risk offences, then there's less of that goes on for all sorts of obvious reasons.
Thank you. So, following the murder of Zara Alina by Jordan McSweeney, and the fact that it took 6 days for the probation service to ask the Met to arrest him, what conversations have you had to improve the speed at which probation communicates with the Met?
I think that's more a question for probation than it is for me.
Yes.
But surely the Met should be expressing their concerns about that, and someone should be having a conversation with probation about the fact they need to sharpen their act. Would you not agree, Commissioner?
I think it's for others to hold probation to account. I mean, we will do everything we can to work with them, but so it's not for me to hold them to account.
Can I come in on that just to say what MOPAC is doing? Because, I mean, clearly this is a devastating murder. And we have been looking at the best way to learn the lessons from it. I mean, although there were failings by the probation service at the time of the perpetrator's release, there had actually been a long line of engagement with the state on the part of the perpetrator, which kind of culminated in this terrible event. The Deputy Mayor, who chairs the London Criminal Justice Board, is going to write to partners across the criminal justice system this week to ensure that we're using this tragic event to learn between agencies about what actually happened. And also, it is our intention to write to central government, both Home Office and Ministry of Justice, to call for an independent multi-agency review to look at how all the agencies, not just probation and prisons involved in this case, might have done things differently. So it's clearly absolutely vital that we do learn the lessons from this devastating event.
Thank you. And what do you think can be done to encourage women to come forward on crimes such as rape and sexual assault?
Well, I mean, I think that links to what we were talking about earlier in terms of driving up trust and confidence, because obviously these cases do huge damage to women's willingness to come forward to report cases. So, you know, tackling the culture in the Met, driving out misogyny, creating a clearly anti-misogynist organisation is absolutely key to that, as well as a number of measures that obviously the Mayor has been taking to tackle women and violence against women and girls, which is a clear area of priority for both him and the Deputy Mayor.
I don't think so I agree with what Diana says, but I don't think this is just about the police. I think it's about the whole criminal justice system and the support around it. I mean, I think sort of it must be probably the most ghastly and intrusive sort of crimes that we're talking about here, and to expect a victim to have that hanging over them, the prospect of giving evidence for 2, 3, 4 years, as we're seeing with some of the cases at the moment, is completely unconscionable. And I think we need a much more dramatic change in the way the criminal justice system works overall, and the police have our role in that. But it can't be just about us.
Right. No, I'm not suggesting it is. I think everybody needs to take responsibility for this, and all parties have a part to play. Just quickly touching on sanction detection for rape, I'd be interested to know what the Met's doing to improve that, but also do you know what sort of success rate is when it does actually go to court? Because currently we're only looking at sanction detections of around 6%.
I'd have to write you on the court issue. So Project Soteria, which MOPAC started, which is looking at a different approach to rape investigation, pulling best practice across the country, being much more offender-centric. That's been a big part of us improving our detection rates. So we're in the top half of the country. I can't pull them out the back of my mind at the moment, but it's detection rates across the country, across rape, and particularly fell about 2018. They went down dramatically for a range of reasons in terms of changing the law and practice, which is of real concern. And they're slowly building back up, but they've got a long way to go. But so I'm pleased that we're making progress, but we're not complacent about it. There's an awful lot to do.
Two more questions, one really for MOPAC. A scheme in 2021 was announced allowing people from domestic abuse victims to stay in their homes while the perpetrators found an alternative accommodation. How successful has this been, and what more can be done to find safe places for women fleeing domestic abuse?
Are you talking about the new duty upon us to provide secure accommodation for domestic abuse victims? Is that what the scheme you're referring to?
Well, I'm really asking you about what you're doing to enable victims of abuse to stay in their homes, and then you obviously have to find alternative accommodation for the perpetrators. That's something that was announced in 2021. And then also, I'm also asking you about finding safe spaces for women fleeing domestic abuse. So whatever you know.
Yes,
on
well,
that.
we've made considerable investment in support services, including specialised response to support all victims to have equal access to justice and services. I mean, the Mayor's absolutely clear that women shouldn't be having to change their behaviour, and as I say, has launched a new strategy that champions a public health approach to ending violence against women and girls, which includes our £1 million on our education toolkit, which has been launched in schools, which is directed at particularly at boys to help them recognise and tackle sexist and misogynistic behaviour, and extending the pioneering GPS tagging pilot programme to tag knife crime and domestic abuse offenders who are released from prison, which has recently been extended. And in terms of refuges, I can write to you about what we're doing there and what our investment levels are, but I know it's something that we prioritise.
Yeah, I mean, if you could on both of those aspects, because it's two very different aspects. There's one, trying to enable the victim to stay in their home, which wouldn't mean you have to provide alternative accommodation for the perpetrator. But there's also what we do to accommodate those who are actually fleeing domestic abuse, which again would mean housing that particular victim. So it's two very different aspects. That perhaps I can write to you so you can see it more clearly.
That would be
perhaps.
fine. Thank you.
And finally, the Commissioner, if I can ask you this question, what improvements have been made for whistleblowing in the Met against officers showing dangerous and toxic behaviours?
So we spoke earlier about our external reporting line. We've done the same internally, and that's similarly producing sort of several cases a week. So that's positive. I think the most important thing here is whether officers believe leaders are up for confronting the issues. It concerns me when I see some commentators suggest that people don't report because they're in fear of their colleagues and canteen culture type things. I don't think that's the main issue. I think the main issue is confidence in leaders to tackle it. Because if you were going to report something against a colleague, you would think, if I'm going to put my hand up and sort of do this difficult thing, I need confidence the system will back me and follow through. So I think it's more about leaders, and that's the important thing. So I think what we're seeing is with our commitment, what sort of me and other leaders are saying, with the Louise Casey report, with our response to that, we are seeing increased confidence to report, and we're trying to make sure we harness that by doing a good job in terms of following through. For example, like those alleging sort of sexual misconduct and criminal allegations, putting real specialists in that world. So that's the way we're doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. We're now going to move on to anti-corruption. Some of these I think might have been answered, but starting off with my colleague, Assemblymember Pidgeon.
Thank you very much. So Mark, you set out very clearly at the start your action review refresh, and that gave us a great context. But let me just tease out a few issues. One, you said you're going to come back to us with details of the staffing in that unit, and also if you're not at full capacity there, when do you expect to be? So that would be really helpful for us. But can you explain to us kind of the workload of that command? How many current cases do they have? How many? You said it's about 1,000, I think, from this, I'm going to call it a database trawl that you described at the start. And what is the caseload that team are dealing with, please?
So if you wanted a detailed layout of caseload, I'd have to come back in terms of that detail. Well, so the types of work, so you've got across the whole of professional standards, or do you just want the Anti-Corruption Abuse Command?
I think the Anti-Corruption Abuse Command, particularly, because you're focusing on rooting out corrupt officers, which we all support.
So within that, you've got an intelligence function. So any sort of initial allegations, how do you need to research those, particularly if you get a phone call to a hotline. So you're researching the background of officers and whether this looks like there might be some credibility in it. There are some investigative teams. There are the key thing on this side is the proactive work, so proactively going after officers. So we've got some information that sort of Officer X may be pick something simple, stealing money from the property store, how we're going to find that officer, how we're going to get evidence against that officer. So it might involve surveillance, it might involve other research. Likewise, we have a unit there that looks at the officers we've got known concerns about, and we're putting restrictions on and how we can manage them out the organisation. So there's a range of proactive functions that we've strengthened. We grew it by 30% as we with existing resources, as we stood up this separate command. And some of them are recruited, some of them are in posts have been recruited, and we've got about 40% increase in the amount of proactive and covert investigations they're doing.
So the biggest challenge is capacity?
So we've made a stab at actually this extra capacity will give us a good head start on what we need to do. Over the next few months, as we get through this review work and the workload settles down, we'll have to review that capacity and see whether it's right and whether we need more or not.
And in terms of the hotlines you've talked about, you've got the external one, and you've talked about effectively an internal one. Since you've been in post, how many calls and your absolute publicity around, I want to root these officers out, encouraging people to come forward, how many calls have both of those different hotlines received?
So each of the internal and external are producing sort of tens per week each.
Okay.
Low tens each.
Low tens per week. So that is increasing their workload. Will you be reviewing the number of officers in this command if needed, so you can tackle this?
And at the moment, there's quite a bit of resource pressure there that we're looking at, because you've got both the increased new investigation workload coming in, and also you've got this backward-looking pieces of work, reviewing the 1,071 old cases, if you like, and doing this data wash vetting review. So if you overlay more new cases with reviewing old work, it creates quite a bit of pressure, even with the extra resources. So we're constantly looking at that.
And also in there, you've got the existing caseload, because there must have been, as we know, because some of them are going through the courts, the 2 or 3 a week we're going to see, must be hundreds of existing cases that are ongoing. So will you be able to, if you can't give us it today, write to us with that detailed breakdown? That would be great. And that command is taking over cases that were already in the system, presumably.
Yeah. So we've broken out of what was the professional standards department. We've broken out the proactive and intelligence function to have a separate command, because we think if you want to tackle a problem, you have to go after it. You can't just wait for reports to come in. So creating that stronger proactive emphasis is what the extra command does. But you've still got the sort of core bulk of what is and was DPS in terms of all the reactive investigations, some of which are internal, some of which are a member of the public complains an officer was rude to them, or whatever else it might be.
Okay, that's helpful. And how are you working with the IOPC on all of this? The command, have they got a close working relationship?
Close working relationships, and we, the Deputy Commissioner and I are very keen we take a more sort of forthright approach to referrals. So we're doing a lot more. There's some mandatory referrals to the IOPC, but we're very keen they have as much visibility as they can cope with in terms of our work, frankly. So we're doing more voluntary referrals, so to give them sight of what we're doing and give them the opportunity to pick up anything independently if they feel they need to.
Lovely. And finally, from me, you talked about leadership, and the leaders have got to be up for confronting the issues. There was an article in the Mail on Sunday from Lord Brian Paddock, where he set out his experience, albeit 20 years ago, in the Met, of different systems sitting on panels, officers being disciplined, officers being dismissed, and then more senior officers reinstating them despite the red flags. Now that says to me that there could still be issues in leadership roles. So what are you doing around that? And secondly, will you or one of your senior team, or even Louise Casey, speak to Brian Paddock? Because there must be learning from his experience that could feed into the work you're doing.
Yeah, one of us can definitely pick up the phone to Brian. So I think some of the leadership issues is about, so most of our leaders are good people. Some of this is about confidence and skills, which is why I've spoken about leadership and training. Some of it's about policies, some of our policies perhaps leaders feel uncomfortable using them, and so they find it difficult. So there's a lot of work to do to create a leadership that is skilled and confident at dealing with this. But it shouldn't all be seen as this is leaders who don't want to. It's about equipping them and giving them the ability to do so.
And just finally, a question that I've asked many, many times when I used to be on the MPA is, there is an issue, I would suggest more in the past, around Freemasons and declaring that, and whether that has any influence. Are you looking at all at that to see if that has any impact, or has had any impact in this whole process around trying to root out corrupt officers and people sometimes turning a blind eye?
It's not something that's come up at all in any of our intelligence and research. I think a long time ago, policing put in place a policy that you had to declare it. So
But they don't have to. It was never enforced.
Is that right? I'll double check that. It's not something I've seen any evidence is a problem. I think we've got many other places to look rather than that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you. Very briefly, the IOPC was brought up. Are they getting any quicker? Because for a very long time that you'd have officers not able to drive because they were being investigated for something relatively minor, and they were off various sorts of duties.
So they need to get quicker and we need to get quicker. So if you look at the Louise Casey report, I think our investigations have an average length of a year. Their investigations, I think, was 3 or 4 months longer than that. So, and given they take on particularly complex cases quite often, that's not that surprising that it's longer. But both of us need to be quicker, because it's. But if we've got something wrong, it's bad for the victim of that it takes so long. And if we've got something right, it's bad for the officer that they've got it hanging over for that period of time. And so, yeah, for both reasons, this needs to be quicker.
Absolutely, and they're of course off duty when we need them actually doing their
Exactly.
work. Okay, thank you. Assembly Member Ahmed.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, you have touched on the issue of the amount of time that it takes to look at misconduct cases, but I wonder if we can go just a bit deeper into that. What actions have you taken to reduce the time it takes to investigate misconduct cases? What impact are your actions having, and what are the next steps?
So the timelines are coming down slowly. The extra resources that we put in professional standards, some of that has gone into that. The big volume is in this reactive caseload, and it has been too slow. It's been something that I think MOPAC's been raising for quite a long time. So we are seeing those numbers starting to come down. We're going to have to keep an eye on our resources levels, and as the previous member was suggesting, in terms of, as you got more work coming in, have we got the resources right to be able to get through the cases properly? But we are seeing progress on that.
Thank you. It is something that Londoners, I think, are very, very concerned about, because they don't understand why it takes so long. So it is reassuring to know that work is being done. Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Moema.
Thank you, Chair. My question is to Diana, and I wondered if you could briefly outline how MOPAC has strengthened its oversight of Met disciplinary processes in the last 6 months, in addition to the 2 points that you raised before about your work to date.
Yes, certainly. I mean, the first thing I'd like to acknowledge is that we do recognise that this is an area where we do need to strengthen our response. Because of obviously the increased attention being given to these issues, the increasing number of cases, the particular emphasis that the Met is now placing on it, and shortly we will have the outcomes of the Casey review and of Dame Angiolini's reviews also. So in practical terms, we are recruiting 2 additional officers to the MOPAC oversight and professionalism team to kind of increase capacity there. We also, in the last few months, or not in the last few months, but over the past year or so, we've been regularly meeting with Barbara Gray, who is the AC in DPS in the Met, to discuss the learning from cases, how that links to HMIC report recommendations and their wider transformation plans. We also meet monthly with the Met to discuss high-profile cases and identify any emerging themes in those cases, such as sexual assault or use of social media, for example. Our focus is really on the opportunities for the Met to intervene at an earlier stage and to make sure that they're using data as far as possible to identify appropriate risk factors in order to kind of help root out poor behaviour and corruption. As Sir Mark has remarked, we've also been encouraging them to the Met to push the boundaries of the conduct and complaints legislation so that investigations can be sped up and we can exit officers as quickly as possible. I mean, clearly, you know, as we've been discussing, there are going to be challenges here because the action that the proactive way that SAMARC is responding to this issue is obviously generating more cases. You know, 30 to 40 a week coming through the helpline. That's a positive that you know, those are being surfaced. And as he said, some of those actually relate, a third of those, I think, relate to other forces. But that's going to kind of increase the throughput. So it's absolutely key that we are being as efficient and responsive as we can, and that we've got effective, you know, resources in place. I'm also conscious that you have written to us on your police conducts and complaints report, and that we owe you a response on that, and that will be forthcoming very shortly. That included a recommendation around uplift in IOPC funding. So we have written, we've included that in a letter that was sent to the Home Office Minister last week following the police settlement as something that we would support.
So Mark, I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, if how you have found that oversight and how it's changed in response to your approach since you've become Commissioner, and then to both of you, if you feel like there are the resources in the Met to uphold those high professional standards that we aspire to.
So I think in terms of a new leadership team on my side, settling down and working with MOPAC, it's been it's absolutely fine, and we're finding the right way to work together, because there's things we need support on in terms of I know, policy and politics and money and various issues that we're constantly discussing and looking at. And so it's that balance, isn't it, between working in partnership, but also MOPAC is there to scrutinise us as well. And so getting the mix of those things right is never simple, but I'm very satisfied with how it's going.
Just to add that I'm also satisfied with how it's going. And I think it is fair to say that we have observed markedly less defensiveness, more more transparency and openness with the new senior leadership team, and we're working in collaboration with them, whilst also, of course, maintaining appropriate oversight.
Okay, thank you. So we're now moving to His Majesty's Inspectorate, putting the Met, I should say, into Engage. My colleague, Assembly Member Garrett, is going to lead the questioning.
Morning. Yeah, so we're going to start with you, Sir Mark. So the result of being in the Engage process, what is the Met doing differently, and what tangible results might we see already as a result of that process?
Yeah. Thank you. So the strategy that we've published, the draft strategy, is heavily influenced by the Engage process. The publicised letter that started the Engage process last summer, I think, had 13 or 14 bullet points in it, listing an area, sort of A to M or N, listing a range of concerns. And we're working through those. Some of those are symptoms of some deep-lying issues that we're looking to tackle. Exit from Engage will come. Their criteria are: you are making progress, and you have a credible plan to go forward. Those are the two things, and that's a reasonable generic statement. So some of the things that we've done so far, sort of like that are referenced in it, the Daniel Morgan recommendations, we're on track to deliver most of those at the moment, so about 80% of those. The others, and a common theme, a big area is around victim care, and particularly around contact centre and call handling, and that's a big theme in our plan, and we're putting more resources into there, and we're trying to sort of change the way we work there. There's quite a lot of fundamental change required in that environment. In terms of areas like the Project Tenacity we mentioned earlier was about getting on top of some of our violent offender areas. Another area they highlighted was we had a massive backlog in terms of online sexual abuse, child image and sexual abuse referrals, and we've taken that backlog down from thousands to very few, so we've sort of caught up with that. So there's several areas which have been long-standing issues which we've got progress on. Of course, there's more to do. And so I think, for me, the balance, some of the symptoms you can work through quite quickly. Some of the underlying issues, say like control room not working as well as it needs to in terms of call handling, that's a big system volume issue which takes a bit longer to get through. But that's a sort of a spread across the sort of things we're doing.
Okay. The improvement plan that HMI asked you to produce as part of that process, I think you referred to it just now. Is that something that is that public? Have you shared that with the committee?
We've done update reports with HMIC. I mean, our improvement plan is really, we're not creating different documents. We have a strategy. That's what we've published. That's how we're approaching it, and that contains all the things we need to do. I think one of the things that's not helped the Met in the past is having too many strategies with too many pages in, and actually trying to be really focused. These are the most important things that we need to do for London, what they expect. That's critical, and that's what that turnaround plan is trying to do. So we're going to keep coming back to one document as much as we can do, rather than having so many different strategies that you can't see the wood for the trees. That's the trees you're chopping down to write the strategies on. Yeah,
I mean, we do have email these days. So, I mean, I take that as a no, but I take the argument for your no that if we just look at your overall strategy, are you saying that if we look at that should encompass all of the various strands of work you're doing, including this improvement plan and everything else as well? So we look at that, study that closely. That should tell us all we need to know.
Exactly.
Okay. In terms of the engage meetings that happen sort of regularly as part of that process, who is attending those meetings? Who's sort of in the room?
So those are chaired by Andy Cook, who's the chief HMI. He chairs them. The London HMI, Matt Parr's in the room, and then there's sort of on their side of the table, so to speak, there's a few other people supporting them, and then on our side of the table, so to speak, is myself and the mayor and the deputy mayor. Again, supported by one or two other people from my team and Diana.
Did you see you were there in the room? I assume.
Yeah, myself and the mayor. I said yes, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. And what are the measures? I think you perhaps suggested this before. So the measures of progress that the HMI are looking for, are you making progress on the things that they've identified, and is there a credible plan to continue to make progress?
So what they're trying to say is that the test to come out of Engage shouldn't be perfection on the basis that no big organisation is ever going to be perfect, but sort of the test should be you're in Engage because you've got a collection of issues that are either collectively or individually so acute that you need special attention. So are you making progress on those issues, and is the trajectory and the plan convincing about where you're heading to? That's what they want to look for. Okay,
and sort of thinking, the layers further down within the Met, the sort of not necessarily the top team who are working with you closely on it, but the sort of senior leaders and the team further down in the Met. What's the response at that level to the Engage process? I suppose what I mean is, what does it mean for them, or what do they think it means for them?
So, I think I don't think most of them should be troubled by it. But by what I mean is it's for senior leaders to make sense of the environment that we're operating in. There's the Engage issue, there's Morgan recommendations, there's Casey recommendations, etc. It's not for, I know, a superintendent who's in charge of volume crime investigation on a BCU shouldn't be worrying about all that. It's up to us to create a strategy that captures all those things and makes clear for him or her their role in this is these are the priorities for them in terms of that context. So they will see it filtering through. An example of this would be the call handling environment. If we look at victim care, we look at all the reports. We did a big analysis of, I think, 1,000 recommendations, I think at least were in it, from HMIC and other bodies over the last few years. And what I found was these were being dealt with as on separate checklists, which is a very messy, bureaucratic way of doing it. You bring them all together and arrange them, you discover that I think it was like 22 or 23% of them were around victim care, scattered across multiple reviews. If you bring that together, then you work out what are the big chunks of activity you need to do to improve that, one part of which is the sort of the initial contact, if you like, from the control room. And so you have a systematic approach to improving the control room, rather than doing trying to tick off individual recommendations from this report here and this report there and that report there, if that makes sense. So what the leaders are seeing is a much clearer, simpler strategy as this approach lands, rather than having multiple people holding to account on checklists, which doesn't get you anywhere.
No, that makes a lot of sense. I think one of the life experiences of let's call them middle management in any organisation is you have multiple different processes ongoing further up in the organisation, which each spit out different sets of priorities.
Exactly.
Several of which are in conflict, and no one tells you how you're meant to resolve it.
Exactly.
So the resolution is happening at the senior level, where, as you say, there's this one strategy. Everything feeds into that strategy. The senior leaders are creating that strategy, and further down the organisation, that should mean a consistent set of priorities and messages.
Yes, and that's why we're doing an executive redesign in terms of restructuring our senior leadership and accountability structures and performance frameworks. All of that it's all sort of, for a public viewer, this is all really boring and interesting stuff, I know, but it's the foundations of how you run a big organisation successfully.
Yeah, I mean, organisations are big teams of people that get complicated things done that one person can't do by themselves.
Exactly.
And so how that gets done is actually, anyway, for me, quite interesting, which I suppose is how I end up sitting here. So turning to MOPAC, if I may, Diana, so what are you satisfied from MOPAC's point of view about the progress that the Met are making and the way that they're engaging with that engaged process?
Yes, absolutely. As Mark has mentioned, the Mayor has been to the PPOG, which is the curious acronym for the HMIC meeting that runs the engaged process on a couple of occasions to support the Mayor. And indeed, we welcome the scrutiny that's being provided, and we're keen to use the engaged process and to kind of drive the fundamental changes that we need. So. Yes, the Mayor is strongly in support of the Met's plan and is participating actively in the process. Kenny is the expert on engage, so I am going to ask him whether he wants to add anything.
I mean, well, I would say there's much to add. I think it's safe to say we're very pleased with how it's being done. We're very pleased with the level of engagement that the Commissioner and his team gave us in terms of the opportunity for the Mayor, Deputy Mayor and MOPAC to feed into the turnaround plan. It did feel like a genuine sort of partnership approach there, which is very positive, and we are very supportive of everything Sir Mark has said in terms of having one plan which brings everything together rather than things going off in multiple directions, so not much to add.
So what's the task list for MOPAC in terms of supporting the Met to get where they need to get to?
That's fine.
So oh, sorry.
Diana, can we ask you to answer the CEO?
Well, our task list is to look at the various aspects of the turnaround plan. There are 9 priorities within that, and to scrutinise their progression across those identified areas, including through our regular oversight board meetings, which we have every couple of months.
One of the questions that I think has come up here before, I think with the Deputy Mayor at a previous meeting, was about how to what extent it reflects on MOPAC that obviously the Met got to this position. And I was a bit concerned. There was a comment by Sir Tom Windsor that the decision to move the Met into the engaged process was partly about losing confidence in the Met and partly about losing confidence in MOPAC's ability to turn around the Met. And so, his view was that it's not just because the MPS was failing, it was also because MOPAC was failing. So what sort of internal reflections is MOPAC having on that, either on that observation or on, in the problems that points to?
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this last time when MOPAC board came before the committee, and we acknowledged that the HMIC report that has resulted in the engaged process identified some issues that MOPAC had already identified itself. And we continue to use our oversight function to ensure that those issues are being tackled. But of course we keep that under review constantly, and you know, as I say, we have taken steps to strengthen our oversight in areas where we think that has been, you know, has perhaps been deficient, with misconduct being and professional standards deficient is perhaps putting it a bit strongly, but where it could be strengthened, with our oversight of misconduct and professional standards being one of those. Of course, I mean, there is always learning to take. There are so many different agencies in this space who are commenting on what the police are doing all of the time. So there is always more that MOPAC should be doing, and that we need to take account of.
Okay. It's just that I remember getting slightly cross with the Deputy Mayor at the time when she gave a very similar answer. And you know, the language of the answer you've just given me was about continue to and keep under review. That's not the language of an organisation that's having a sort of deep and meaningful conversation with itself about how its inadequacies led to the problem. You know, it's very different from the language that we now hear from the Met about how there are problems, we acknowledge the problem, not we, Met acknowledge the problems, and this is what we're doing about it. The language of continue to and keep under review, and of course, you know, any organisation, ... that does sound a bit like, I mean, I'm trying to find a diplomatic alternative for complacent, but I've struggled, so I'm just going to say it does come across a bit like that.
I would challenge complacency. Sorry, did you want to come in?
No, I was just going to say...
Well, let me phrase the question differently. So what are the real actions that have taken? What are the changes that have happened in MOPAC as a result of this, where you said, we've got these problems, this is what we're doing about it differently?
Pardon? Go on.
No, Diana, you're the Chief Executive.
Yes, well, we have made various structural changes, as I say, increasing resource in specific areas. So there are things that we have done, and we continue to keep MOPAC under review and ensure that we are doing the best job that we can. I would, you know, I would certainly challenge complacency. Did you want to come in?
To be blunt, the best way you could challenge my charge of complacency would be to list things rather than.
Well, let me send you a list of things. In fact, I think that may be one of the outstanding areas on the yeah, in your follow-up from the previous session.
Okay, I'm conscious of time, and also that you know, I've asked you the question a couple of times and you haven't listed anything. I think if I were chief, let me just say, I think if I were chief executive of an organisation that had a deeply meaningful conversation with itself about the problems it has and how it's got into difficulty, and somebody asked me, what are the things that you're doing in this organisation that you're leading, I feel like I'd have at least one or two on the top of my head. Otherwise, I would wonder, you know, what am I doing?
So can I just come in if that's okay? So first of all...
No, I'm sorry. The questions are directed to Diana.
Okay. As I've said, I will send you a list.
Okay. If I can note my disappointment, but I think that's the end of my
Yes,
questions.
okay.
Before we go on to... I'm in charge of oversight, so...
Yeah,
it is
please.
Pertinent to
we've got the Chief Executive here. Tell me, Diana, these meetings with the HMI, do you attend all of them?
No, they're quite limited in terms of numbers. So you know, they will only usually allow us to admit two or three people. So.
But you're the chief. With respect, you've got Sir Mark Rowley there. You can't get more senior than that. And the mayor, who I have to admit, you can't get more senior than that. You're the chief executive officer. We hardly ever see you. I would have thought that was such a high-level meeting and so important to get right. MOPAC should be doing everything they can to assist the Met, if they see anything that's wrong, to assist the Met. We must all assist the Met for our own sakes. So you don't go to any, you send your staff to these meetings as opposed to seeing what's happening yourself. Is that correct?
Well, I think I talked to you when I was last here about my distributive leadership model, which means that I am here to lead MOPAC, not to be MOPAC. You know, and there are other people that can undertake responsibilities. I don't have to do everything personally. It may be sensible for me to go to a future PPOG meeting, and I will decide that as and when. But clearly, you know, I task and I think about capacity and what other responsibilities I may have on a particular day, and whether it would actually add much weight for me to attend, as well as Sophie, the mayor, Mark and Kenny.
Yeah, it's very important, and I will just say thank goodness Sir Mark is leading from the front. Now, if we can move over, please, to Assembly Member Sahota to finish this section.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioner, when do you hope to come out of the engaged process?
I nearly fell for it then. That's that's not in my gift. We're trying to work up the exact criteria under those headlines I gave earlier with HMIC, and that might give me a view. I mean, I'd like to get out next month. That's not going to happen. That's said slightly glibly. As soon as is possible. We have a lot to do. I'm not in any doubt on that. And I think if I obsess about a process, that's slightly dangerous for London. I should be more focused on what we're doing for London, for a whole range of reasons, including the fact that HMIC have made some very legitimate criticisms and we need to tackle them.
And you feel that you have the capacity and the capabilities to deliver the changes that the HMIC are looking for?
I think sort of headline, yes, but there's a lot of building to do. Sort of in organisational terms, you look at that. You look at the sort of turnaround plan and look at the themes underneath it and the work to be done. That is a lot of organisational leadership and change, and there's technology in there, there's training, there's a lot of work to do. Sort of pulling together, coordinating, delivering an improvement programme of that scale is not straightforward. And the way the sort of the Met, as I find it, doesn't have the hasn't built the capacity and capability to do that, and that's not surprising because it's a new strategy. So getting that around, so building a new leadership team, getting the right support from inside and from outside in terms of some of the different programmes, all of that change management sort of work, that's going to take some time to build, but that's what we're doing. There's not a resistance to us doing it. In terms of our budget propositions, it's in there, and MOPAC and the Mayor have been supportive, but it's not going to, you can't switch that capability on overnight.
And one other thing is that the Peel report highlighted that the call time response, the MP was failing on the national targets. This was a short-term priority for improvement. Where are we with improving those times?
We have been improving. I can't pull the number off the top of my head. I mean, and if you look at that then feeds into our response time, so our I-grade, our immediate response to 999 calls where there's immediate life at risk or an offender at the scene, and our response then to more standard incidents, which I think is within an hour. Both of those, they're still below where we want them to be, but their percentages are now starting to slowly creep up, which is positive.
And Diana, are you happy with the progress the police are making on those call times?
Yes, we are happy with the progress. Oh, sorry. Yes.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Well done, colleagues. We've come in exactly on time because the Chief Executive, Diana Lutchford, has to leave at 12. You've not finished there, Sir Mark, I'm afraid. So thank you very much to Diana Lutchford and Kenny Bowie. And while they are very quietly, I was going to say escorted from the room, but of course it's not quite like that, Lib Peck is going to join us. So can I just take this little quietness for a minute before we get Lib Peck in here, just to ask you, Sir Mark, I've been told by Henry Riley of LBC that he's been having discussions with Just Stop Oil and that they're going to try and interfere with the Coronation itself. Have you heard anything around that?
I haven't seen that intelligence yet myself. I know they have a week of protest planned the week before the Coronation. Whether they intend to extend that into that, I don't know, but that may or may not be true. We will do everything we can to make the Coronation the special moment it ought to be, just as we did with the Her Late Majesty's funeral. I just want to put on record, I'm very grateful to the government listening to my concerns about the lack of specificity in public order legislation, and there are proposals that they're trying to take through Parliament at the moment which should massively help our ability to deal with protest. And I should stress, this is, I have no view, and it's not appropriate for me to have a view on where the line should be between sort of protest and disruption of other people's lives. That's a political decision to draw the line in law. I have a very strong view, though, that the current legal framework is so fuzzy and grey, it's very hard policing-wise. So if government is able to sharpen the definition in law, then it'd be much easier for policing to sort of exercise Parliament's will in terms of where that line's drawn, and that will be helpful in any protests as we lead up to the coronation, if that law is in place in time.
Well, I'm sure you'll be pushing out an open door with Suella Braverman, and let's hope so. We certainly don't want anything disrupting that. So now we're going to go on to our final section, homicides and offensive weapons. Welcome, Lib Peck, to us from the Violence Reduction Unit. Colleagues, you've got 20 minutes, and I will then stop the conversation, going over to Assemblymember Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, Lib, and good morning, Sir Mark, again. So, Sir Mark, when we last spoke, which was at the policing plenary, or at least spoke in public, you said you very rarely get asked questions publicly about why it is that young black men are 12 times more likely to be murdered in London over the last decade than young white men. This is an opportunity to answer some of those questions. So we have some questions on homicides and offensive weapons. Now, the VRU has published a homicide framework which has, let me just get the right piece in front of me, which so the VRU's homicide framework identifies 6 areas: mental health, drugs, alcohol, gangs, social media, and patterns of escalation, and has recommendations alongside those for the ways in which those issues can be taken into account in terms of homicide prevention. And I just wonder, Commissioner, how have the findings of the VRU's homicide framework changed or kind of influenced your approach to preventing homicide?
So I think the detail on the sort of the plan is for Lib to talk to, but in terms of its influence on us and on me, I'm deeply committed to prevention being part of what we do, which is why I talk about the strongest ever neighbourhood policing. Our enforcement contribution is massively important in terms of removing men of violence who draw other people into violence and have a toxic effect on communities. But prevention is how you solve things long term. And I mean, our sort of last year, our sort of teenage homicides reduced by half, which is fantastic compared to the year before. And there have been sort of big falls in the deaths of young black men as part of that, which is excellent. And I would call out sort of a powerful example of sort of what I would call community crime fighting, the work in Croydon, where the previous year to 2 years, Croydon had a sort of awful series of stabbings and deaths of sort of teenagers, and work between the PCU commander, who's just retired after a very sort of long, distinguished career, and one of his superintendents, Andy Britton, working with community leaders, really changed their approach, and we're thinking much more about how do we police these issues, working with the community, getting officers more engaged with training in terms of how they use their powers, like stop and search, doing that with community members, and so finding ways to deploy police powers and to operate in a way that builds trust and has the positive effect rather than in ways that can damage trust. And that's the sort of example that fits in with some of the issues that Lib talks about. But I think some of the wider preventative issues that they're commissioning, I think, is for them to talk about.
Lib, would you like to just come in and talk a bit, just specifically about your homicide framework?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, we published the framework at the end of last year. It was research conducted by the Behavioural Insight Unit, and what was really impressive about it, and I think it was a partnership approach, was that the Met enabled the Behavioural Insight Unit to go in and look at 50 cases that had happened in the past, sadly, of homicides, and to see, in a sense, what the connections could be between those 50 cases, and to then think about how, if you were developing a different framework, that you could capture that intelligence going forward. And we've had nothing but cooperation from the Met in developing that piece of work. And we know from the conversations we've had that, people felt that it was really, potentially very impactful. And because that's 50 cases, and that's not small and insignificant by any means, but actually because you're building a different way of using this information and intelligence, it was agreed that this year we are doing a further piece of work on 300 cases. And what we're looking for is, yes, those trends, yes, those readovers. So you will, I'm sure, have read in some of the media at the end of last year some of the things that were highlighted, missed mental health appointments being something that should be much more of a flag in terms of perhaps potentially homicide, or thinking about how social media was used, and perhaps particularly around the instantaneous response to something like Snapchat. So some trends that were interesting in and of themselves across the 50 cases, but actually the real value of this work is building a framework that can actually help us move forward. And we're very pleased to be doing that alongside the police.
So another piece that relates to this is the use of offensive weapons homicide reviews, and presumably the work that you've done in terms of the framework suggests things that might be being looked at in offensive weapons homicide reviews. Now, these were introduced by the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act in 2022, April 22, and the government said it was going to run an 18-month pilot of offensive weapons homicide reviews in parts of London, South Wales and the West Midlands. Now, we were told that the pilot was going to begin in summer 2022. Then in December 22, the Mayor said the pilot hadn't yet begun. I understand it's now expected to start at the end of February, so the end of next month. That is subject to confirmation by the Home Office. But when are you expecting? Are you expecting that to go ahead in February?
Yes, we are. So the background to this was when we were first set up, we did a strategic needs assessment across London, obviously to look at patterns of violence, and sort of mentioned that when I previously have come before the committee. And one of the things that came out from that with the accompanying piece of work was that we do reviews of some types of homicide, but not all of them. And actually, the Violence Reduction Unit is very much in the business of trying to understand the causes so we can bring, obviously, long-term change and long-term reduction. As a result of that, the Mayor advocated for more reviews so we can, really understand after an incident exactly all the factors that have caused it to happen. And we were delighted when the Police and Sentencing and Crime Bill, when it came into Act, recognise that. Now, we've had lots of conversations with the Home Office during the passage of that legislation, and lots of discussions about how we can then best set up those reviews with local authorities, because primarily they would be the place which would hold the local hold those reviews. The delay has been down to, I think, the delay in the legislation coming forward, and we are subject to the Home Office kind of signing that off. But I'm confident that the amount of work done by the team, the relationship with the Home Office, the kind of drive in the legislation means that actually in March we will be in that place. And it is, you're right, in 2 BCU areas across London, which actually means it's across 5 London boroughs.
So which are the BCUs?
So I knew you were going to ask me that. And it's Lambeth and Southwark, which is 1 BCU, yeah. And it's Barnet and Brent and Harrow, thank you. Sorry, yes, Harrow, which you'd be very familiar with. Those are the boroughs, and we work very closely with the local authorities. We've been, thinking about how to scope this up and working with our colleagues across the country as well, where there are pilots going on there. Because what we want to make sure out of this is not a long process of review, this is, you know, that involves an enormous amount of bureaucracy, but by the time you actually get to the results, you've not been able to use what you found.
Yep.
So there is a real urgency about making sure this is sort of process light, but really gets to the nub of some of the issues.
Okay, and that work is being led by the VRU rather than by the Met?
Yes,
Yes.
but we work in close contact, I mean, with a coordinating, very much so, because this is after, so for example, obviously if there's a homicide, you know, which involves, very sadly, sort of domestic violence, there is automatically a review put in place for incidents that happen for over 18s. In certain instances, there is no necessity for a review, and what our original research showed was that actually was a failing and a gap, and this is what that hopes to rectify. But understandably, and I think sensibly, the Home Office don't want to kind of, you know, do that in one fell swoop across kind of England and Wales, and so the recommendation is to get the learning from some of the pilot areas, and there are 2 in London, probably I assume, because obviously London is a big complicated place, and also because we were pushing for it.
When will we get the data out of these reviews?
Well, it will depend, because this is slightly different to the framework. But what we're saying, well, it is different to the framework. But what we're saying in the reviews is, after an incident has happened, we need to be able to have the kind of responsible authorities coming together to work out terms of reference about how they are going to look at the build-up as to what happens, some of the flags that may have been missed, some of the things that could have been done differently, and to put that into a report. We're pushing for that time frame to be shorter so we can get learning, but obviously it's you know, sadly contingent on when a homicide has happened and then learning from it. So I can't really say exactly when you're going to find that information out.
Okay, well, we'll keep asking you questions on that once those reviews have started. Now, it was very good to see the VRU publish their report today on the impact of young people of police using images of knives in social media posts. This is something that I have been banging on about for quite a long time. In particular, we was glad to see earlier this year, at the end of last year, that the Met had actually reduced the number of social media images they were posting of knives, and in particular also interested in the fact that it is young people who are saying that they would prefer that these images of knives on social media are not shared, and particularly from Met Police accounts. And they went down from about over 2,000 images to around about 1,000 images over this last year. So it appears that the Met have been listening, but it's not consistent. So the main Met account doesn't appear to share images of knives on their social media. Some accounts, the Roads account, some of the borough accounts do share them, whereas other borough accounts are doing really good work, showing their work, doing weapons sweeps, but without actually showing any images of knives. Now, your report findings, I'm particularly interested in the piece from the young people, and they report, you know, feeling scared, triggered. They're worried that seeing these images on social media normalises seeing knives. So if young people are saying that it's harmful to see these images on social media, so Mark, do you think it's possible that the Met could commit to not sharing images of knives on their social media?
We're happy to work with young people and to listen to their feedback, and this research is interesting, but I don't think it's quite definitive. I think we have a duty also to inform London as to what we're doing, and I'm sure it's right that putting a photo of every weapon we see out is not appropriate, but likewise I think sort of blocking it and not doing any of it I don't think informs London as to what we're facing and what we're dealing with. So we're interested in the research. We'll keep talking to young people and working out the best ways to inform them and London. But I think a sort of black and white bar is probably not the right answer. And certainly that research isn't that definitive, I don't think, in my reading.
Yeah, there is other research which is more definitive, which is the research that was done by the university. Sorry, I have lost the right note. The research that was done by Charlotte Coleman, an academic, which was done also with Thames Valley Police, which has led Thames Valley Police to decide not to show images of knives on their social media. Obviously, there's always, academic research, but actually what these young people are saying is that they would prefer that the Met was not showing the images. They say that it is harmful. So I hope that the Met will listen to those young people. But Chair, I think you want me to stop now.
I do, thank you. And can I say, it must be a young old person, because I think they're great, because it actually shows what the police are doing. It shows what the police are up against. It shows that stop and search works, because they get these wretched weapons off the street. So perhaps it's my age. But nevertheless,
Chair, you did vote with the whole assembly voted for a motion to stop these images being shared.
Yes, because sometimes I do lose the will to live with motions, you're quite right, but equally sometimes one has to put one's own thoughts aside and go with the flow, which is clearly what I did at that point, because I say, well done, show everybody what you're taking off the streets and what our police officers are up against. I know my colleague, and Croydon was mentioned, you've got 3 minutes, Assembly Member Garrett, and then I have to stop you.
Acres of time, Chair. I really only had one question. So the Mayans work that BRU are doing in Croydon, I suppose it's a double-headed question, really. One is, what metrics do we have to demonstrate the success of that work? And I've seen some of it up close and spoken to the people involved. I think it appears to be pretty successful. So what sort of evidence base do we have to underline that, not just the top-line youth homicide figure? And secondly, what are the prospects of that programme continuing?
Yeah, if I'll be very brief, because we've obviously got a small amount of time. I will send you the metrics. We are evaluating all of the 8 MyEnds programmes across London. We got an initial 2-year funding that is now extended to 3 years, and then we are probably going to go back out to commission our MyEnds sort of community-led approach for the following 2 years. So I'm really pleased that we've got that sustainable funding in place, and the potential for that to be either extended with existing programmes or reaching in new places, because that community-led, based on a neighbourhood approach, is absolutely fundamental, I think, to what we hear and the evidence we get about making change. And certainly there's some good examples in Croydon. I do, if I can, just for 1 minute, come back on the knife imagery. I wanted to agree.
Sorry, just before you do that, so because I think if anyone from Croydon who's involved in that heard your answer, they'll heard the word recommissioning.
Yes.
So in normal words, does that mean it might not continue in Croydon, or
yes.
It might continue in Croydon?
Yeah, and the Croydon MyEnds are completely aware of that. I mean, when we first set up, we were a 2-year programme. We've got an extension of 3 years funding in 8 neighbourhood places. We are then going to look at inviting other places and parts of London that haven't had the opportunity of that money to bid for it, and we will be, assessing that. It may well be that Croydon would be successful. I don't know, because that will be an open process.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'll let you continue.
Well, I just want